Good afternoon, class. Hope everyone is well. I wanted to touch bases with you since we have not been meeting. I sent out an announcement that we were informed that there was an outbreak of mold in the building, and just as a safety precaution, we were instructed to not meet. So I'm doing this video as a supplement to somewhat keep us up to date as best we can until we determine how we will proceed. I'm thinking that we may meet in the library, but that you have to secure and get those spaces as they are available. So I'm not sure what that looks like, but we will be meeting. Just want to find out, and I just want to make sure that everyone is safe and well. So good afternoon. In addition to that, Thursday there is the campus-wide, if you've seen on the webpage, the campus-wide Juneteenth celebration is from 9 to 5. If you get an opportunity and your schedule permits, please attend. It's very informative. And we will be talking a little more about that whole component or phenomenon of Juneteenth and what that stands for. So I'm on campus now, so we're going to go through some things. If you also notice, I marked you present, so your attendance, because that also is a part of your grade in those points, so I didn't want anybody's points to be skewed due to me not doing the attendance. So that has been done, and I'm sure that you all received a notification. Some additional assignments have been open. I have not put a due date as of yet on the Hidden Colors assignment. However, the origin of the Ku Klux Klan is due June 22nd. The White Racism paper in America, June the 17th, we did the myth of race and evolution of skin color and the birth of a nation. Those are your video synopsises that you have been assigned thus far. You will probably be having 2 more of those. And why I like to do those synopsises is that gives you an opportunity in the quiet of your own house, room, dorm, to process in the library, to process this information, digest it, and then execute it. We're looking for evidence of critical thinking. We're not trying to teach you what to think. Again, we're trying to guide you on the path of how to think. What type of things from a historical perspective that you should be looking for to determine if something is true, false, debatable, etc., etc. And there's a lot of historical terms that we use within the English language. I kind of mentioned some of them in class to you: myth, fable, folklore, a tale, etc., etc., that relate to history and have certain definitions. So that's just an example of what that is. So what I want to go over today with you is these notes at the bottom. On the class notes, it says Charter Generation. So I just wanted to highlight some of the points. When we shared that the last time we met, I introduced some things, but I want to highlight those again. On Monday, probably, as I put in the announcements, we will be having, either Monday or Wednesday, you will be having a quiz on those 13 colonies. I disseminated some information and shared with you the genesis of those colonies, the date that they were established, by which country they were established, and why. Within that, we talked about indentured servitude, and as I told you, the big 4: France, Spain, England, and Portugal were all in competition in what we call the era of discovery or the era of exploration. And that's for the European. This is focusing on when he went out to encounter things which he had not seen before, thus erroneously calling it the New World. It really wasn't the actual New World. It's just that the European, or the Anglo-Saxon, if you will, was unaware. So he went out to explore. You know from elementary school that there were some perceptions that the world perhaps may have been flat. And that's a part of their history that's included. So we'll look at that, and we'll look at the what's and the why. So let's go down, if you're with me, if you can. As this is being recorded, you can go back at your leisure and follow along and pause it to highlight what we're going to discuss. As I'm pulling the notes up, that charter generation, just to reiterate, that charter generation, as I stated, was those first individuals, the first wave of individuals that were totally African and were either forcibly taken, were indentured servants, etc. But that charter generation means the first group. I shared with you that initially, not all blacks that came to what became known as America or the 13 colonies were in a condition of servitude. That's not the case. If you recall, as Dr. Bartlett shared in her video, an excellent scholarly lecture on Birth of a Nation, she said that the term white was not actually in the English language or used as a descriptive term until 1619. This is when it became a matter of fact or letter of the law, when they began to say white men, white women. I explained to you in class that how it was typically done is that individuals were not determined about their worth so far as their phenotype, but they were nationalistic, meaning that a person would say that they were an Englishman or a Frenchman or a Spaniard, or he was Dutch from the Netherlands. But that did not deter from what they looked like, because you had people of color, what we would call a mulatto or quadroon, octoroon, all those things that were just Englishmen. So as the law progressed, as Dr. Bartlett explained, they began to bring in the term white, because we looked at that component and it addressed specifically white women, because people of color at some point, well, not so much people of color, but females were in the minority as it relates to the population. And you started having a new phenomenon of a mixed breed of people. So some of these, the majority rather, I stand corrected, of these laws were to curtail what's called miscegenation. Miscegenation is the marriage of two people that are not of the same nationality, commonly and in a broader sense, just broken down as black or white. So let's look at some of the notes. At the top it says important dates and population growth. As I said in 1619, please highlight this. You should be very cognizant that the first 20 black individuals arrived in Jamestown and were assigned to various colonies. Jamestown was the first colony. I don't think I explained to you about the lost colony of Roanoke. Give me 3 seconds and I'll tell you about that quickly. The lost colony of Roanoke, Virginia, was actually the first colony, but Jamestown is the first successful colony. The Roanoke colony, that first wave of settlers that came, they strangely disappeared. They came up missing. Ships went back to England to come back with supplies, and when they came back, the camp had been abandoned. There were signs of violence, etc., etc. Some historians even assert that it could have been poor weather conditions, and there's a wealth of information out there that during those horrific weather conditions that some even went into the practice of cannibalism. There's a lot of information out on that. You have people that were not indigenous, that animals were different, plants were different. We talked about the diseases and the immune system that the European and the Native Americans, they somewhat conflict. The European had a wealth of diseases, yellow fever, measles, chickenpox, that were not particularly normal in the sense of those that were here. But this first wave of blacks, those 20 individuals, came to Jamestown. Okay, in 1621, the ship James lands in Virginia, bringing a black man named Antonio. That's very important because we're going to double back around and explain to who Antonio was and what he did. By the year 1623, a total of 23 blacks lived in a colony of roughly 2,000 people scattered across Jamestown and Elizabeth City. So you have 23 blacks in a population of about 2,000 people. Now we went from 1619 to 1623. And immigrants, if you will, were constantly coming in indentured servitude, signing these contracts of indenture, meaning that they would work for a period of time to remove a debt. This debt may have been owed to a landowner or a landlord or a duke or a earl, or also, as I alluded, that some of these people that were indentured service also were criminals. This was a way for the monarchy, remember we talked about the monarchy, to remove that nefarious component from their society, to remove the criminals. So if you're taking the criminals and allowing them to come and be indentured service, you're removing your problem, the process of incarcerating somebody. Not that they had laws as we had today where individuals have rights, because we talked about the difference in a citizen and a subject. Citizens have rights. So they would come and work this out, and a lot of these people were coming from the prisons and whatnot from Europe. So we will continue to look at that well. Moving further down, we talked about, and this is highly important, William, the firstborn so-called Negro in the New World. This is very important because when we look at religion, when we look at the role of the Catholic Church in enslavement, how they endorsed it, how they authorized it. Pope Nicholas II issued the Dum Diversas, or the Papal Bull, which authorized Portugal to go out and subdue the heathen, infidel, and non-believer in Christ to subjugation. So the Catholic Church issued an edict that said that these people could go out and actually take and secure lands and property and put these people in a condition of enslavement for perpetuity. Perpetuity means life. So this first boy named William, born in 1624, I share with you his parents, Isabella and Anthony, gives birth to William, the firstborn child in English America. That's very important. How this was accounted for is through church records. The Anglican Church baptismal records. The Anglican Church is another word for the Church of England. The Church of England is an offspring of the Catholic Church. It has its origins with King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII was a unique character historically. He wanted an heir to the throne. Many of you may or may not know that the Catholic Church does not recognize divorce. That's not a thing that the Catholic Church does. However, there is, if I'm not mistaken, annulments, but the Catholic Church does not recognize divorce. So King Henry was marrying women that could not give him a son. If they couldn't give him a son after an extended period of time, he would either create some trumped up charges on them or have that person killed. This speaks to the integrity and mindset of the monarchy and the people, some of them, during this time period. So he broke away and started the Church of England, which was very ritualistically similar to the Catholic Church, with the bowings and the kneelings and the Latin masses and the ringing of the bells and the holy water, etc., etc. All that is a component of Catholicism. Catholicism is also known as Romanism because it's actually the Roman Catholic Church. Romanism, Catholicism, all those are interchangeable words for the same thing. And that's important to kind of know that you won't be confused about that. So William was baptized in the Anglican Church, and they have the records of when this occurred, and this is how they recognize who Williams was. The legal status, because his parents, Anthony and Isabella, later secured their freedom. William was baptized as a free human being and not a slave. He's recorded as living in Elizabeth City, named after Queen Elizabeth. So typically, it depends on if it was Spanish law or English law. The law would state that if parents, the parental status, and the child would be born into perpetuity of enslavement. Some municipalities had it established where if the mother was a slave, which is in essence the same thing, that the child would be enslaved for a period of time. It you go figure, it just depends on who colonized you and who had captured you. So Anthony Johnson, Antonio arrived again in 1621. He married Mary, and they established themselves at the Waggasport colony and eventually became recognized as the first free family of color in a colony. They became a leading family. Anthony acquired land. Anthony acquired property. And this is not swept under the rug, but not often talked about, that there were, oddly enough, some black plantation owners that perhaps were either issued a writ of manumission. Manumission means that they were freed by a certain period of time, by a certain age, if the master died and left that in his will and testament, that person X, by the time they make 21 or 25, they are to be freed. But oftentimes, a lot of these laws weren't tangibly enforced. So Anthony Johnson acquired land and became a well-to-do slave owner. Write down this important point as well: the status of servants. Black immigrants are repeatedly identified as servants rather than slaves. That's that point that I initially started off with. Signing contracts of indenture. So a lot of blacks, again, it wasn't a black thing and a white thing, or I hate you, or it's superiority. They were Englishmen, they were Spaniards, they were Frenchmen, and a lot of them came here willingly. It was not until years later, until this process began to wear and was not sustainable. So as it became non-sustainable, they had to seek another labor force. Enslavement is definitely and emphatically about a workforce, someone working for free. So that's important that you get that. In addition to that process of indenture, to some degree, the courts, since they were free, recognized blacks in court, these indentured servants. It says that colonial courts were fully open to the complaints of both blacks and whites. Blacks individuals successfully sued white people and held their overseer or master liable for these contracts of indenture. A local example, in 1624, John Phillips, a black man baptized in England or Spain, testifies in Jamestown against a white man. This testimony is legal because he became a Christian. Now that's a unique and a conversation for another time. However, early on, there's records that religion was not sought initially to be given to the heathen infidel black. Some of them thought that you didn't have a soul. There was no need to teach you religion. As the time rolled on, they understood that through the perpetuation of said religion, that you could be kept subservient, that you would be more willing to adhere to not an African spiritual system, but the concept of Christianity as it was taught to the individuals during this time. So that's very important, and we'll talk more about that. I'm going to go down. I'm going to skip over this little section as it talks again about the legal component. I want to talk, but we talked about that in class, the tobacco fields, et cetera, et cetera. So go over these notes and kind of highlight or put it in your books, in your notes, because that is important. Again, we will probably be having that quiz on those 13 colonies. I know you have those notes. We talked about Georgia and James Oglethorpe being a colony that was established for who? Catholics. We talked about Massachusetts, a colony being established by the so-called Pilgrims for religious freedom. We talked about William Penn and Pennsylvania, a colony being established for who? The Quakers. We talked about the Puritans, who were a faction of the Catholic Church who thought that the Catholic Church needed to be purified. So that's important as well. Those are some of the things that I will be asking on the test. And it's going to be true and false. So you just need to make sure that you are cognizant of that. I want to jump quickly to something else. I didn't want this video to be too lengthy. The time is rapidly moving. I'm at 24 minutes now. I said maybe 45 minutes, if that. So I need to point out one or two more things from the textbook as I ask you to read chapter 1. I wish I could see you right now, because I know 80% of you have not read. I know you haven't. Because we're not avid readers. It would behoove you to start familiarizing yourselves with this data. History or any other subject, as a matter of fact, is not something that you can just look at when it's time to come to class. That model is not sustainable. A professor lectures, you take notes, you read. You should at least be studying or reviewing, looking over something, because we are habitual by nature, and that's how the human mind works. Unless some of you have total recall or are just brilliant scholars, there's no way you can learn history, name, dates, and events by just looking at it when you come to class or when I talk to you. That's why I set up the YouTube channel, for you to have access to go back to not only information from this semester, but from at least 5 to 6 years ago. Same classes, same subject matter. There's something that can help you. It can help you learn. Some people learn by listening. Everybody's not a good listener. They don't comprehend. Some people may have mental acumen through hands-on. Some people need that. There's different learning styles or learning types. So please read. I implore you to read. It would behoove you to read. Sometimes we don't know that we don't know. So let me touch maybe 5 or 6 quick points from the textbook that you should have grasped. We talked in class about diaspora. Diaspora is a Latin word that means the disbursement. We talked about the African diaspora, meaning people that willfully or forcefully traveled abroad. I talked to you about, and I mentioned in class, the supercontinent Pangaea. Remember when I shared with you that the earth is on tectonic plates? Thousands, millions of years ago, over time, the earth shifted on its tectonic plate. You have natural phenomena, but once upon a time, the earth was in essence, in its entirety, one landmass. So we talked about that. So you can kind of see how individuals could migrate. They weren't riding on planes, buses, or cars. They either walked or at some point began to ride on horseback. So let's look at this chapter really, really quick, and just let me point out some things to you. Follow along. We're not going to be much longer. Chapter 1. Bear with me, the computer's moving a little slow. And this is somewhat redundant. We're not going to just rehash a lot of this, but if you learn anything from me, you need to understand these dates. You watched the Myth of Race video, and you learned about the out of Africa theory. That is one of the most solid, foundational hypotheses. Hypothesis or theory, because a hypothesis is not an educated guess, but a hypothesis is the relationship between two variables that can be tested or measured. This is how an hypothesis comes along. An hypothesis is not about fate. An hypothesis is not about something you can't see. It has to be two variables that can be tested or measured according to the scientific method. I didn't create it. That's such is the nature of scholarship. You have to be able to test something to determine its components and what it does and so on and so forth. That's just how that works. So the out of Africa theory, the chapter early on talks about that. And I mentioned to you that Homo sapiens began to migrate 70,000 years ago. You have this evolution 250,000 years ago, and that they began to go into Europe about 70,000 years ago. So actually, there's a plethora of historians that say that those who categorize themselves as European, we know that they are actually descendants of those Africans that left Africa. Genetic isolation, genetic variance, and produced that phenotype. So their history is roughly 70,000 years old, if that old. Okay, those who categorize themselves as white. We talked about the development of kingdoms in this chapter. The kingdom of Cush, the kingdom of Nubia, and the kingdom of Kemet. Kemet is Egypt. Cush is Ethiopia. It's spelled C-U-S-H-R with the K. Nubia means that's the Sudan. That means the land of the gold. All of those were interconnected. Kemet means the land of the blacks. Some white Egyptologist says that, well, no, you're talking about the black soil. Okay? That's the argument that they try to debate this with. But the Honorable Sheikh Anta Diop, through genetics and linguistics, showed how the early Kemites described themselves, what they thought about themselves, and what words meant in their language. So land of the blacks is a direct pointing to themselves. Excellent point. Those areas had major contributions to society at large. So we're going to stop here. I want to read this part to you really, really quick. It says, "What is Africa to me? The ancestral origins of African America. What is Africa to me?" The Harlem Renaissance writer Courtney Cullen asked in a poem in 1925, reflecting on how he should understand the ancestral heritage of African Americans. As a strong black American should align himself with strong, bronzed, and regal men, women from whose loins sprang the birds and the Garden of Eden. Was Africa just a distant point of origin? Cullen was not just alone asking this question, but from the earliest days of the forced migration of Africans by Europeans into the colonies of the Americas, black Americans have maintained a sense of cultural identity and ancestral heritage of Africa as the place of their origin. How these connections have been drawn has been complicated, and we will discuss that at more length. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to open up a tab in chapter 1. I'm going to post the assignment in Canvas. You have some other assignments that are due. Chapter 1, please complete. My computer is moving extremely slow. Please complete the questions that says chapter 1 review. That will be opened. Today is Tuesday. That will be due by Thursday. I'm going to have the module established on Canvas. Please follow instructions. So take heed to what I've said. Hopefully we can get back on track. I just wanted to check in with everybody and at least do a 30-minute video to kind of keep you honest and to let you know that we are going to continue and we're going to make it through the finish line. Remember, always investigate the information you receive. If it is indeed the truth, it should always stand the test of an investigation. Never be afraid to ask why or how or prove it. Never be afraid to ask that. And in closing, life is a series of choices. Every choice has an outcome, good or bad, based on your options. What will you choose today? Strive to try to choose the smartest thing to do, even when you don't feel like it. Be on the lookout for the posting of this assignment and feel free to contact me or email me with any questions. Go Jaguars!